A down-on-his-luck janitor, barely making ends meet, suddenly inherits a crumbling motel in the middle of nowhere. Everyone laughed until the first guest arrived. What happened next? Stick around, because this story will remind you that miracles hide in the most unexpected places. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Stories like this one, they're just a click away. The unexpected inheritance. Carlos Mendez wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The familiar sting of bleach lingering in the air as he pushed a mop across the high school cafeteria floor. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but he didn't mind the late hours. The quiet was better than the noise, better than the pitying looks from teachers or the kids who tossed their trash just out of reach, grinning as he bent to pick it up. At 52, his knees ached, his lower back throbbed, and his hands were rough from years of scrubbing, but he had never been one to complain. Work was work, and work kept the lights on. His apartment, a cramped one-bedroom on the outskirts of Albuquerque, was barely holding together. The faucet dripped, the fridge hummed too loud, and his old Chevy pickup had a habit of stalling at stoplights. But it was home, or at least it was all he had. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between a water bill and a fast food coupon. The envelope was thick, the paper crisp, the return address stamped with the name of a law firm he didn't recognize. For a moment, he wondered if it was a mistake. Maybe some debt collector had finally tracked him down. But when he tore it open, his breath caught. Dear Mr. Mendez, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Leonardo Leo Mendez. As the sole surviving relative, you've been named the beneficiary of his estate, including the Sunset Crest Motel, located on Route 66 near Tucumcari. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer of ownership. Carlos sat down hard on the edge of his couch, the letter trembling in his hands. Leo, his father's brother, the man who had taken him in after his parents died, who had taught him how to change a tire, how to throw a punch, how to survive. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years, not since the fight, not since Carlos had packed his bags and left, swearing he'd never ask for another damn thing from anyone. And now Leo was gone. The next morning, he called the lawyer. The motel was his, free and clear, no liens, no debts, just a building that had been sitting empty for years. It's not in great shape, the lawyer admitted, but it's legally yours. When Carlos told his co-workers, they laughed. You? Running a motel? Eddie, the school's head custodian, snorted into his coffee. Man, you can't even keep the teacher's lounge stocked with paper towels. Carlos ignored the jab, but the doubt gnawed at him. What did he know about running a business? About hospitality? About anything other than cleaning up other people's messes? Still, he drove out that weekend, the desert stretching endlessly around him as Route 66 unfurled, like a faded ribbon. The Sunset Crest Motel sat just off the highway, its neon sign dark, its parking lot cracked with weeds. The building was a relic of another time, a low-slung row of rooms with peeling turquoise paint, a rusted ice machine, and a lobby that looked like it hadn't seen a guest since the 80s. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight filtering through broken blinds. The front desk still held a ledger, its pages yellow with age. He flipped it open, his fingers brushing over names and dates, comments scribbled in margins. Best sleep I ever had. Felt like coming home. Leo, you're a lifesaver. Something tightened in his chest. Then, a sound. A soft click like a door closing. A whisper of movement down the hall. Carlos froze. Hello. Silence. He told himself it was the wind, or the old pipe settling. But as he turned to leave, the neon sign outside flickered. Once, twice, then buzzed to life, casting a red glow over the empty lot, like it had been waiting for him. The ghost of the past. Carlos stood frozen in the dim glow of the neon sign, his pulse hammering in his throat. The flickering red light painted the motel's peeling walls in eerie strokes, like blood seeping into old wounds. He hadn't turned the sign on. Hell, he hadn't even found the breaker box yet. A gust of wind rattled the lobby's loose window pane, snapping him back to reality. Get it together, Mendez. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his hands over his face. Maybe the wiring was just shot. Maybe the place was so far gone that even the electricity had a mind of its own. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He grabbed his flashlight and ventured deeper into the motel, the beam cutting through the darkness. Room doors stood slightly ajar, their numbers crooked or missing entirely. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something faintly sweet like old perfume. Room 3 caught his eye. The door was shut tight, unlike the others. He turned the knob, half expecting resistance, but it creaked open with ease. Inside, the space was eerily intact. A neatly made bed with a faded quilt, a dresser topped with a rotary phone, its cord coiled like a sleeping snake. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but it didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Carlos stepped inside, his boots leaving prints on the carpet. A framed photo sat on the nightstand. He picked it up, wiping the dust with his sleeve. His breath hitched. It was Leo. His uncle stood in front of the motel sign, younger, grinning, his arm slung around a woman Carlos didn't recognize. She was pretty, dark hair, a floral dress, her smile warm but tinged with something sad. Behind them, the motel looked alive, vibrant, cars parked in every spot. When had this been taken? And who was she? A floorboard creaked behind him. Carlos spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the empty doorway. "Hello," he called again, louder this time. No answer, just the distant hum of the neon sign. He retreated to the lobby, his skin prickling. The place was getting to him. That was all. Too many memories, too much dust, too many years of silence between him and Leo. He needed air. Outside, the desert stretched vast and indifferent under the moonlight. He leaned against his truck, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands. The smoke curled into the night as he stared at the motel. What the hell was he supposed to do with this place? He wasn't a businessman. He was a janitor. A guy who fixed leaks and unclogged toilets, not some roadside innkeeper. A sound made him stiffen, a soft thump like something falling inside the lobby. Carlos dropped the cigarette, grinding it under his heel. "All right, enough," he muttered. If there were squatters or critters inside, he'd deal with it now. He marched back in, flashlight raised like a weapon. The lobby was empty just as he'd left it, but the guest ledger on the desk was open to a different page. He hadn't touched it. Carlos swallowed hard, stepping closer. The page showed a single entry, the ink fresh compared to the yellowed sheets around it. October 12th, 2023. Room 7. Ruth Coleman. A chill slithered down his spine. That was today's date. Before he could process it, a knock echoed through the lobby. Carlos nearly jumped out his skin. Who the hell would be out here at this hour? He hesitated, then yanked the door open. An elderly woman stood on the step, a suitcase at her feet. She wore a lavender cardigan and a smile that didn't waver under his stunned expression. "Oh, good," she said, as if she'd been expecting him. "You're open." Carlos blinked. "Ma'am, this place isn't." "I stayed here 30 years ago," she interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "Room 7. It had the best view of the sunrise." She peered past him into the dim lobby. "I suppose it's changed some." Carlos opened his mouth, then closed it. None of this made sense. The ledger, the date, this woman appearing out of nowhere. "Look, I just got here myself. The motel's not ready for guests." Ruth, if that was even her name, tilted her head. "Isn't it?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, pressing it into his hand. "I won't be any trouble. Just one night." Carlos stared at the money. He could use it. God knows he could use it. But this was insane. "How do you even know to come here?" Her smile deepened, cryptic. "Oh, you know how word gets around." Before he could argue, she wheeled her suitcase past him, the wheels squeaking against the worn linoleum. Carlos watched dumbfounded as she headed straight down the hall toward room 7, a room he hadn't unlocked, a room he wasn't even sure had a key. Yet when Ruth reached it, the door swung open smoothly, as if waiting for her. She stepped inside without hesitation. The door clicked shut behind her. Carlos stood alone in the lobby, the $100 bill crumpled in his fist. Outside, the neon sign buzzed louder, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. The first guest. Carlos didn't sleep that night. He sat in the motel's lobby, the old rotary phone on the desk in front of him, his fingers tapping restlessly against the wood. The $100 bill Ruth had given him lay flat under the dim glow of a desk lamp, crisp and undeniable. He kept waiting for her to come back out, to explain herself, to tell him this was all some strange joke. But the door to room 7 stayed shut. At dawn, he finally gave up and stepped outside, the desert air cool against his skin. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in his bones. Maybe he had imagined it all. Maybe exhaustion was making him see things. Then he heard it, the sound of a shower running. Carlos turned sharply, staring at room 7. The curtains were drawn, but steam fogged the edges of the window. Someone was in there. Someone alive, real. He hesitated, then knocked. Ruth. The water shut off. A moment later, the door opened, and Ruth stood there, wrapped in a towel, her silver hair damp. Good morning, she said cheerfully, as if it were perfectly normal to take a shower in a derelict motel. Carlos gaped. How? How is there even water? She blinked at him. You turned it on, didn't you? He hadn't. He was sure of it. Before he could press further, Ruth disappeared back inside, humming to herself. Carlos ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. This was insane. He needed coffee. He drove into town, the nearest gas station, a good 20 minutes away. The clerk, a bored teenager with a lip ring, barely glanced up as Carlos dumped a handful of snacks and a cheap coffee pot onto the counter. You own that old motel now? The kid asked, nodding toward Carlos's dusty truck with its new Sunset Crest sign barely visible under layers of grime. Carlos stiffened. How'd you know that? The kid shrugged. Small town. People talk. He handed Carlos his change. Heard it's haunted. Carlos's fingers tightened around the paper bag. Yeah? What else have you heard? The kid smirked. Just that folks used to go there when they had nowhere else to go. Your uncle, he had a way of fixing things. Carlos didn't like the way he said it. Like fixing meant something more. When he got back to motel, Ruth was sitting on a bench outside room 7, dressed in fresh clothes, her suitcase packed. She smiled when she saw him. I'll be checking out now. Carlos frowned. You just got here. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Oh, I got what I needed. She patted his arm. You will too. Before he could ask what that meant, she was walking away, wheeling her suitcase toward the highway. Carlos watched, baffled, as she stuck out her thumb. A passing truck slowed, and she climbed it without hesitation, disappearing down Route 66. Carlos stared after her, then down at the key she'd left in his hand. A tarnished brass key for room 7. He pocketed it, shaking his head. The day passed in a blur of cleaning and repairs. Carlos scrubbed floors, patched holes, and even managed to get the ancient coffee pot working. By late afternoon, the lobby almost looked presentable. Almost. Then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, another car pulled into the lot, a beat-up sedan with out-of-state plates. The driver's door opened and a young man stepped out, stretching like he'd been on the road for hours. He was lean, with a scruffy beard and a backpack slung over one shoulder. Carlos stepped outside, crossing his arms. Can I help you? The guy grinned. Hope so. Need a room for the night. Carlos hesitated. Motel's not really open yet. The guy, Daniel, as he introduced himself, shrugged. Saw the sign on. Figured it was worth a shot. He glanced around, taking in the cracked pavement, the flickering neon. Looks like the kind of place that's seen some stories. Carlos exhaled. He could use the money. And honestly, after Ruth, what was one more weird night? Cash only. $40. Daniel handed over the money without complaint. Carlos led him to room 5, the only other room he'd managed to clean so far. You own this place? Daniel asked as Carlos unlocked the door. Apparently, Carlos muttered. Daniel smirked. Cool. He dropped his bag on the bed. Hey, you got any food around here? I'm starving. Carlos almost said no, then remembered the snacks he'd bought earlier. I've got some chips or something in the lobby. Daniel's face lit up. Dude, you're a lifesaver. The word sent a strange prickle down Carlos's spine. Lifesaver. Just like the notes in the ledger. He left Daniel to settle in and headed back to the lobby, his mind racing. None of this made sense. The motel was a wreck. There was no reason for guests to show up. And yet, here they were. He was pouring himself a drink from a half-empty bottle of whiskey he'd found in a desk drawer when the bell above the door jingled. Carlos looked up and froze. A woman stood in the doorway, a camera slung around her neck, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She was pretty, in a sharp, no-nonsense way, her eyes scanning the lobby with keen interest. Marissa Vega, she said, extending a hand. Travel blogger. I heard this place was reopening. Carlos didn't take her hand. Who told you that? She smiled undeterred. A little bird. Her gaze flicked to the guest ledger, still open on the desk. I'd love to interview you. The Sunset Crest has quite the reputation. Carlos's grip tightened on his glass. What reputation? Marissa's smile turned knowing. Oh, the kind that makes people drive miles out of their way to see it. She leaned in slightly. They say this place fixes people. Carlos's blood ran cold. Before he could respond, a loud thud echoed from the hallway, like something heavy had fallen. Both of them turned toward the sound. Room 7's door stood slightly ajar, and from inside, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of laughter, the secret in the walls. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Carlos and Marissa stood frozen in the lobby, the silence pressing in around them. The door to room 7 hung open just a crack, a sliver of darkness visible beyond it. Marissa was the first to move. Was that? I'll handle it. Carlos cut in, stepping in front of her, his pulse hammered in his throat, but he forced himself to walk toward the room. He had given Ruth the key. She was gone. No one should be in there. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the same as before. No suitcase, no sign of disturbance, except for the old newspaper spread out on the dresser, as if someone had been reading it. Carlos approached cautiously, his fingers brushing the brittle paper. The headline screamed up at him. Local motel owner vanishes, 1979. Beneath it was a grainy photo of a younger Leo, his smile easy, his arm around the same woman from a photo in room 3. The caption read, Leonardo Mendez, owner of the Sunset Crest Motel, reported missing by employees after failing to return from a supply run. Foul play suspected. Carlos's hands shook. Leo had disappeared? No one had ever told him that. The last he'd heard, his uncle had just moved on, left the motel behind. A floorboard creaked behind him. He whirled around, but the room was still empty. Then his eyes caught on the bathroom door, slightly ajar now, when it had been closed before. Carlos moved toward it, his breath shallow. He pushed the door open. The mirror above the sink was fogged, as if someone had just taken a shower. And scrawled in the condensation were 2 words. Find her. Carlos staggered back, his heart pounding. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. Everything okay in here? Marissa's voice made him jump. She stood in the doorway, her camera raised, her expression a mix of concern and fascination. Carlos quickly wiped the mirror with his sleeve, the words disappearing instantly. Fine, he said roughly. Just checking the plumbing. Marissa's eyes darted to the newspaper on the dresser. Before Carlos could stop her, she picked it up, scanning the headline. Wow, she murmured. So your uncle didn't just leave the motel. He vanished. Carlos snatched the paper from her hands. This doesn't concern you. Marissa held up her hands, but her gaze was sharp. Carlos, I think it does. I've been researching places like this for years. There are stories about the Sunset Crest, whispers that people come here when they're lost, that they leave different. She hesitated. Did your uncle ever mention a woman named Clara? The name hit Carlos like a punch. The woman in the photos. The one with the sad smile. How do you know that name? He demanded. Marissa's eyes lit up. So it's true. Clara Reyes. She worked here in the 70s. And according to local legends, she and Leo were more than just co-workers. She pulled out her phone, scrolling before turning the screen toward him. It showed a digital scan of another newspaper article, this one with a smaller headline. Waitress disappears from Sunset Crest Motel, 1978. Carlos's stomach twisted. 2 disappearances. A year apart. A soft knock at the open door made them both turn. Daniel stood there, his hands in his pockets, his expression uneasy. Not interrupt, but is someone else staying here? I could have sworn I heard a woman singing earlier. Carlos and Marissa exchanged a glance. The 3 of them stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the motel's history pressing down on them. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, came the faint, unmistakable sound of a woman's voice humming an old, familiar tune. Carlos's blood ran cold. He knew that song. Leo used to sing it. The truth about Uncle Leo. The humming stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the 3 of them standing in breathless silence. Daniel was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, what the hell was that? Carlos couldn't answer. His throat had gone dry. That song, La Llorona, an old folk tune about a weeping woman, had been Leo's favorite. He used to sing it while fixing broken pipes or painting over chipped walls, his deep voice carrying through the motel's halls. Marissa, ever the journalist, recovered first. She adjusted her camera, her fingers moving quickly over controls. We need to document this. There's history here, real history. Carlos finally found his voice. No cameras. This is my family's business. Literally. Daniel ran a hand through his scruffy hair, looking between them. Dude, I don't know what's going on here, but I signed up for a cheap room, not whatever this is. Carlos couldn't blame him. He wanted to walk away, too. But the newspaper headlines flashed in his mind. Leo missing. Clara missing. The motel standing empty for decades. And now, guests arriving as if summoned. He made a decision. I need answers, he said, more to himself and the others. And I know where to start. An hour later, Carlos pulled his truck up to a rundown diner on the outskirts of Tucumcari. Maggie's Kitchen, the sign read, though half the letters were burned out. The place had been here forever, since Leo's time. If anyone remembered his uncle, it would be the old-timers here. Marissa and Daniel had insisted on coming. Carlos didn't have the energy to argue. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an elderly waitress wiping down tables. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled, her eyes narrowing at Carlos. Then, recognition flickered across her face. Well, I'll be damned, she said, straightening. You're Leo's boy. Carlos's chest tightened. You knew my uncle? The woman, Maggie, according to her name tag, snorted. Knew him? Honey, I fed that man pie 3 times a week for 20 years. She gestured to a corner booth. Sit. I'll get coffee. They slid into the cracked vinyl seats. Maggie returned with a pot of coffee and 4 mugs, settling in with them like she'd been expecting this visit. You hear about the motel? She stated, not asking. Carlos nodded. People keep showing up. Strange things keep happening. And I just found out Leo didn't just leave, he disappeared. Maggie's expression darkened. She poured herself a cup of coffee, taking a long sip before speaking. Leo was a good man. The best. But that motel, it got its hooks in him. Marissa leaned forward. How? Maggie's eyes darted to Daniel, then back to Carlos. You know about Clara? Carlos nodded. Just that she worked there, and that she vanished too. Maggie sighed. Clara was special. Had a way about her. Could calm a crying baby with a touch, soothe a drunk with just a look. People said she had gifts. She lowered her voice. Her and Leo, they were fixing more than just a motel. They were fixing people. Folks would come through, broken in one way or another, and leave feeling whole again. Daniel frowned. That sounds like some supernatural crap. Maggie fixed him with a stare. Boy, you're staying at the Sunset Crest, and you don't believe in things you can't explain? He shut up. Carlos's fingers tightened around his mug. What happened to them? Maggie's face fell. Clara got sick. Real sick. Leo tried everything, doctors, healers, even some old remedies from her family. Nothing worked. One night, she just wasn't there anymore. Leo swore she wasn't dead. Said she'd gone into the motel somehow. Marissa's eyes widened. Into it? Maggie shrugged. Like I said, that place got its hooks in him. After Clara, Leo wasn't the same. Started saying the motel was alive, that it needed people to keep going. Then one day he was gone too. She reached across the table, gripping Carlos's hand. Now you're back there, and folks are showing up again. Carlos's skin prickled. You think it's starting over? Before Maggie could answer, the diner's phone rang. She hauled herself up to answer it, her voice too low to hear. When she returned, her face was pale. That was Sheriff Hayes. There's a man at your motel, Carlos, some big-shot developer. Says he's there to make an offer. Carlos shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. Vance! It had to be. Maggie grabbed his arm. Be careful. That motel, it chooses who stays. And it doesn't let go easy. They arrived back at the Sunset Crest to find a sleek black Mercedes parked next to Daniel's beater. A man in an expensive suit leaned against the hood, smirking as Carlos jumped out his truck. Carlos Mendez, the man called. Vance Holloway. Heard you came into some property. Carlos didn't offer his hand. Not for sale. Vance chuckled. Everything's for sale, amigo, especially a dumb like this. His gaze slid past Carlos to the motel, his smirk fading slightly. Though I'll admit, the place has character. Marissa stepped forward, her camera raised. Vance Holloway? As in Holloway Development? The company that bulldozed a historic district in Santa Fe. Vance's smile turned icy. Progress, sweetheart. And I put good money on this place being next. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. 50 grand. Cash. More than this land's worth. Carlos didn't take it. I said no. Vance's patience snapped. Listen, Janitor. You don't know what you're dealing with here. This place. A gust of wind cut him off, slamming the motel's front door shut with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. The neon sign flickered wildly, casting jagged red shadows across the pavement. Vance stumbled back, his cocky mask slipping. What the hell? From inside the motel, clear as day, came the sound of a woman singing, Ay de mi, Lo Rona. Vance's face drained of color. He shoved the envelope at Carlos. Take the damn money. This place isn't right. Carlos didn't move. No. For a long moment, they stood there, the wind howling around them. Then Vance cursed, turning on his heel. This isn't over. He spat, climbing into his car. As the Mercedes peeled out of the lot, the motel sign glowed steady once more. The singing faded. Daniel exhaled sharply. Okay, what is this place? Carlos stared at the motel, a strange certainty settling over him. It's home. And for the first time in years, he meant it. The stand. The morning after Vance's visit, Carlos woke to the sound of engines. He'd been sleeping in room 1, the only room he'd fully cleaned besides room 5, and for a moment, he thought he was dreaming. But the rumble grew louder, shaking the walls. Carlos threw open the door and froze. 3 bulldozers idled in the parking lot, their blades gleaming in the dawn light. Vance stood at the front, arms crossed, flanked by men in hard hats. A sheriff's deputy lingered near the office, looking uncomfortable. Carlos stormed forward barefoot, the cold asphalt biting into his feet. What the hell is this? Vance smirked. Morning, Mendez. Seems there's been a complaint about unsafe structures. County's ordered an inspection. He nodded to the deputy. Sheriff Hayes here is just doing his job. The deputy, Hayes, wouldn't meet Carlos's eyes. Gotta check the permits. Carlos. Standard procedure. Carlos's hands curled into fists. This wasn't procedure. This was Vance pulling strings. Before he could respond, a car door slammed. Marissa stepped out of her rental, camera already raised. Interesting timing, Mr. Holloway. Care to comment for my blog's 1 million followers? Vance's smile faltered. This is a private matter. Not when you're harassing a small business owner. She shot back. A second car pulled in Daniel, back from his early coffee run. He took in the scene and immediately parked his beater directly in front of one bulldozer, killing the engine. Whoops. Guess you'll have to wait. Vance's face darkened. Move the car. Won't start. Daniel lied cheerfully, tossing his keys into the desert brush. Carlos almost laughed. Then he noticed movement at the edge of the lot. People, a dozen or more, walking up the highway on foot. An elderly couple, a young mother with a child, a man in a wheelchair being pushed by a teenager, all heading straight for the motel. Ruth led them, her lavender cardigan bright against the dusty landscape. Carlos's breath caught. These were the guests, the ones who'd come and gone, who'd left notes in a ledger. They formed a silent line between Vance's machines and the motel. Vance gaped. "What is this?" Ruth stepped forward. "A reckoning." Her voice was soft but carried like a gunshot. "This place saved us when no one else would. You don't get to take it." The deputy backed away. "Hands up. I'm out. This ain't worth my badge." Vance whirled on Carlos. "Call them off." Carlos met his glare. No. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the motel sign flickered. The ground trembled, not from the bulldozers, but from something deeper. The humming started again, that same mournful tune. "Ay de mi, Lorona." But this time, it came from everywhere at once, the walls, the earth, the very air. The guests began to sing along, their voices weaving together. Vance stumbled back. "Turn the machines on. Now!" The bulldozers roared to life, then died just as suddenly, their engines choking to silence. The operators cursed, yanking at unresponsive controls. Carlos felt it then, a presence at his back. Warm, familiar. He didn't dare turn around. Vance's men were fleeing now, abandoning their equipment. Only Vance remained, his polished shoes rooted to the cracking pavement. The singing grew louder. The motel's doors flew open in unison, though no wind blew. And in the lobby window, clear as day, two figures appeared, a tall man with Leo's grin and a dark-haired woman in a floral dress, their hands clasped. Vance screamed. He ran then, his expensive loafers kicking up dust as he fled to his Mercedes and peeled out, nearly taking offense with him. The singing faded. The guests exhaled as one. Carlos finally turned. The lobby window reflected only the desert, but on the office desk, the guest ledger lay open to a fresh page. In handwriting he'd know anywhere, it read, "Welcome home, kid." Daniel whistled low. "So, we keeping the bulldozers?" For the first time in years, Carlos laughed until his sides hurt. The Sunset Crest miracle. 1 year later, the Sunset Crest Motel glowed like a beacon under the New Mexico stars. Carlos stood behind the front desk, now polished to a shine, as a young couple checked in for their anniversary. They'd driven 6 hours after reading Marissa's viral article, "The Motel That Heals, a Miracle on Route 66. "You're in room 3, Carlos said, handing them the key. "Best view of the sunrise." The woman hesitated. "We actually requested room 7, the blog said." Carlos shook his head gently. "Room 7's for special cases." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The couple nodded like they understood and headed off, their fingers intertwined. Outside, the parking lot was full for the first time in decades. Daniel, now Carlos's full-time handyman, joked with guests around a crackling fire pit. The scent of roasting chiles and laughter filled the air. Marissa's documentary crew packed their gear near the office, having just finished filming the motel's regulars, the folks who kept coming back, claiming the place had cured their insomnia, their grief, even a Vietnam vet's phantom pain. Carlos didn't pretend to understand it. He just kept the coffee fresh and the doors open. As midnight approached, he slipped away to room 7. The key turned smoothly, though he hadn't oiled the lock. Inside, the air hummed with something electric. The quilt lay perfectly smooth, the rotary phone gleamed, and on the nightstand sat 2 things. A fresh slice of Maggie's apple pie, and a new photo, Leo and Clara, arms around each other, standing in front of a sunset crest that looked decades younger. Written on the back in Leo's handwriting, "Proud of you, kid." Carlos smiled. He left the pie untouched but took the photo, slipping it into his wallet as he stepped back into the warm desert night. The neon sign buzzed overhead, its glow stretching toward the highway like an invitation. "Welcome to the Sunset Crest. Stay a while. Did this story inspire you? Share it with someone who needs a little hope today." And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life miracles. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary places are hiding in plain sight.